The Assyrian genocide, Syriac, or refers to the mass slaughter of the Assyrian population of the Ottoman Empire and those in neighbouring Persia during the First World War. In conjunction with the Armenian and Greek genocides, the Assyrian civilian population of Upper Mesopotamia was forcibly relocated and massacred by the Muslim Ottoman army, together with other armed and allied Muslim peoples, including Kurds, Chechens and Circassians, between 1914 and 1920, with further attacks on unarmed fleeing civilians conducted by local Arab militias. The Assyrian genocide took place in the same context as the Armenian and Greek genocides, since the Assyrian genocide took place within the context of the much more widespread Armenian genocide. Scholarship treating it as a separate event is scarce, with the exceptions of the works of David Gaunt and Hannibal Travis, who have classified the genocide as a systematic campaign by the Young Turk government. Other scholars, such as Hilmar Kaiser, Donald Bloxham and Taner Akam, have differing opinions with regards to the extent of governmental involvement and systematic nature of the genocide, asserting a less systematic policy and different treatment in comparison to the Armenians. Unlike the Armenians, there were no orders to deport Assyrians. The attacks against him were not of standardized nature and incorporated various methods of massacre. In some cities, all Assyrian men were slain and the others were forced to flee. These massacres were often carried out upon the initiatives of local politicians and Kurdish tribes, and Assyrian collaboration with Russians prompted some of them. Exposure, disease and starvation during the flight of Assyrians increased the death toll, and women were subjected to widespread sexual abuse in some areas. Estimates on the overall death toll have varied, providing detailed statistics of the various estimates of the Church's population after the genocide. David Gaunt accepts the figure of 275,000 deaths as reported by the Assyrian delegation at the Treaty of Lausanne and ventures that the death toll would be around 300,000 because of uncounted Assyrian inhabited areas, leading to the elimination of half of the Assyrian nation. Rudolf Rummel gives the number of Christian deaths in Assyrian-populated regions of Turkey as 102,000 and adds to this the killing of around 47,000 Assyrians in Persia. In 2007, the International Association of Genocide Scholars reached a consensus that the Ottoman campaign against Christian minorities of the empire between 1914 and 1923 constituted a genocide against Armenians, Assyrians, and Pontian and Anatolian Greeks. The IAGS referred to the work of Gaunt and Travis in passing this resolution. Gregory Stanton, the president of the IAGS in 2007-2008 and the founder of Genocide Watch, endorsed the repudiation by the world's leading genocide scholars of the Turkish government's 90-year denial of the Ottoman Empire's genocides against its Christian populations, including Assyrians, Greeks, and Armenians. Terminology. The Assyrian genocide is sometimes also referred to as Sayfo or Seyfo in English-language sources, based on the modern Assyrian designation Saypa, sword, pronounced as Sayfor, and as Sayfor in the Western dialect. The Assyrian name Ɂန့ιε, which literally means killing of the Assyrian people, is used by some groups to describe these events. The word 낳κτολάμω, which means genocide, is also used in Assyrian diaspora media. The term used in Turkish media is Syrian ȳαϊκήρυμη. In countries where significant Assyrian diaspora communities exist, the designation Assyrian has become controversial. Notably in Germany and Sweden, alternative terms such as Assyriska, Syrianska, Chaldeaska folkmordet, Assyrian, Syriac, Chaldean genocide are employed. Nestorians, Syrians, Syriacs, and Chaldeans were names imposed by Western missionaries such as the Catholics and Protestants on the Ottoman and Persian Assyrians. The Greek, Persian, and Arab rulers of occupied Assyria, as well as Chaldean and Syrian Orthodox patriarchs, priests, and monks, and Armenian, British, and French laypeople, called them all Assyrians. Background: the Assyrian population in the Ottoman Empire numbered about 1 million at the turn of the 20th century and was largely concentrated in what is now Iran, Iraq and Turkey. However, researchers such as David Gaunt have noted that the Assyrian population was around 600,000 prior to World War I. There were also hundreds of thousands of Maronite Christians in Lebanon, with some Assyrian heritage but which are less often called Assyrians. There were significantly larger communities located in the regions near Lake Urmia in Persia, Lake Van and Mesopotamia, as well as the eastern Ottoman vilayets of Diyarbakir, Erzurum and Bitlis. Like other Christians residing in the empire, they were treated as second-class citizens and denied public positions of power. Violence directed against them prior to the First World War was not new. Many Assyrians were subjected to Kurdish brigandage and even outright massacre and forced conversion to Islam, as was the case of the Assyrians of Hakkari during the massacres of Badakhshan in the 1840s and the massacres of Diyarbakir during the 1895–96 Hamidian massacres. The Hamidiyya received assurances from the Ottoman Sultan that they could kill Assyrians and Armenians with impunity, and were particularly active in Ahoya and Diyarbakir. Outbreak of war: the Ottoman Empire began massacring Assyrians in the 19th century, a time of friendly relations between the Ottomans and the British, who were defending the Ottomans from the Russian Empire's efforts to include under its protection the communities of Ottoman Orthodox Christians. In October 1914, the Ottoman Empire began deporting and massacring Assyrians and Armenians in Van. After attacking Russian cities and declaring war on Britain and France, the empire declared a holy war on Christians. The German Kaiser and the German ambassador to the Ottoman Empire directed and orchestrated the Holy War, and financed the Ottomans' war against the Russian Empire. Responsibility of the Ottoman government: the degree of the responsibility of the Ottoman government and whether the genocide had systematic nature, has been the subject of different scholarly opinions. Concerning the responsibility of the Ottoman government, ÍÄÄ<silence>Ŋ wrote that Talat Pasha ordered the deportations of the Assyrians in the area on 26 October 1914, fearing their collaboration with the advancing Russian troops, but the order was postponed and abandoned 3 days later due to a lack of forces. When the Assyrians did not collaborate with Russians, any plans to deport them were cancelled. Kaiser wrote that the massacres of Assyrians were apparently not a part of the official Ottoman policy and that the Assyrians were ordered to be treated differently than the Armenians. Taner Akam, a leading specialist in the Armenian genocide, cites Ottoman official correspondence in 1919, inquiring the number and conditions of Assyrians deported, to state that the Ottoman government was unaware of the full numerical extent of the deportations of Assyrians. Another Ottoman document orders Assyrians to be detained in their present locations, instead of their deportation, which, according to Akam, indicates that the Assyrian population could have been treated differently from the Armenians, but that they were often eliminated alongside them. Donald Bloxham, a genocide scholar, stated that while Assyrians of Western Persia, Hakkari, Bitlis, Van and Diyarbakir were massacred along with Armenians, they were not subject to the same systematic destruction. Dominic J. Schaller and Jürgen Zimmer wrote that due to the lack of an international diaspora and a nation-state, the Assyrian were perceived as more vulnerable and less threatening by the Young Turks, which led to their extermination being less systematic. Massacres of Assyrians were often undertaken through the initiatives of local officials and groups. Nevertheless, they classified the campaign against Assyrians as having genocidal quality. Ernst II, Prince of Hohenlohe-Langenburg, the German special envoy in Constantinople, sent a report describing systematic extermination of the Christian population of the Diyarbakir province by Reshid Bey, the governor. Martin Tamke wrote that a German charge d'affaires in Constantinople sent to the German Chancellery an article from a young Turk-controlled newspaper, which mentioned the expulsion of Assyrians in the east as an example of the cleansing of the empire of Christian elements. Tamke wrote that documents such as these, along with oral traditions, are evidence of a systematic policy of extermination. David Gaunt compared the attacks on Assyrians in Hakkari and Diyarbakir, and wrote that while the former was mainly perpetrated upon the orders of the Turkish government, massacres, general characteristics according to historian David Gaunt, a primary characteristic was the total targeting of the Assyrian population, including farming villages as well as rebelling mountain tribes. The killing in rural regions was more extensive, while some survived the massacres in cities. Gaunt states that this indicates that a primary aim was the confiscation of land. The property, villages and animals of the villages were destroyed totally to prevent their return. Gaunt states that organized troops were tasked with killing Arabic-speaking Assyrians in Hakkari and Ottoman-controlled parts of Persia, as well as resisting villages. There were also deportations of Assyrians. Gaunt wrote that there was no standardized way of killing. He cites accounts of killings at town halls, river rafts, tunnels, streets, and during the flight of the victims. The methods included stabbing, decapitation, drowning, shooting and stoning among others according to eyewitness accounts cited by Gaunt. These accounts also record local officers having collections of body parts, such as ears, noses and female body parts. Percy Sykes, a British officer in Persia, wrote that the Assyrians would have been exterminated if they had not fled to Persia. However, starvation, disease and fatigue cost the lives of 65,000 more Assyrians on their way to Persia or once they had arrived there. According to Christoph Baumer, Diyarbakir, the earliest programs of extermination took place in the southern province of Diyarbakir, under the leadership of Reshid Bey. A German vice-consul reported in July 1915 that Assyrians were being massacred in Diyarbakir Vilayah. A German consul reported in September 1915 that the adult Christians of Diyarbakir, Harput, Mardin, and Varansk had been targeted, and also mentioned an Ottoman reign of terror in Ahoy. According to the reports, the Assyrian population of 噚was completely killed, along with all the male Assyrians of Mardin and Siirt. The widows and orphans of these men were reportedly left to flee to Mosul on foot, and died on their way due to starvation and harsh conditions. These atrocities prompted the Assyrian Patriarch to appeal to the Russian representative in the Caucasus, claiming that the Turkish leaders were intent on killing all Assyrians. The German ambassador reported that the Ottoman Empire was being cleared of its indigenous Christians by eliminate Ion. In July 1915, he confirmed that the Assyrians of Midyat, Nisibis, and Jazara were also slain. According to the Syrian Patriarchate, the Turkish government ordered an attack on the Christian villages near Mardin, which were mostly inhabited by Assyrians. The soldiers went beyond attacking property and killed civilians. For instance, the Assyrians of Kiziltepe, Telaman were gathered in a church and burned. In Diyarbakir, women and children were deported, but only a very small number reached their destinations as women were killed, raped or sold. Individual accounts of the massacres include several villages. In the village of Cherang near Diyarbakir, 114 men were killed and the women and children were put to forced agricultural labor and given the choice to convert or die. The massacre was committed by an Al-Kamzan death squad, which were recruited by the government and led by officials, while composed of local urban Muslims. In the village of Haniwiya, about 400 Assyrians are believed to have been murdered. In Hisana, a village near Jizya, the 300 inhabitants were massacred, with some managing to survive and flee. The inhabitants of the village of Kavalkar were attacked by Kurdish tribes on 19 June 1915 and killed. Their bodies were then thrown into the Tigris River. In Kafaba, 2 kilometers from the Mor Gabriel monastery, 200 Assyrians were attacked by a clan of Kurds and murdered in 1917. However, there were also cases when those in power chose to protect the Assyrians, as Rashid Osman, the Aga of Sirnak, protected the 300 to 500 inhabitants of Habal. In their book The Treatment of Armenians in the Ottoman Empire, Viscount Bryson Arnold Toynbee included a letter from the Presbyterian American Church in Urmia, sent on 6 March 1916, which related information from a survivor of the events described. In the document, it is written that nearly all of the 30,000 Assyrians of the Botan region had been massacred by the Kurds and Turkish soldiers with the orders of the government. While some Kurdish leaders tried to protect the population, they were unable to, as the order had allegedly come from the government, and such friendly acts were punished. All Christian villages of the plain were reportedly wiped out, including 3 Protestant villages. In Mansouriya, one of these villages, Assyrian women reportedly jumped into the Tigris River to prevent their capture by the Kurds. The surviving women and children were taken as captives. Figures by the Syriac Orthodox Patriarchate presented to the peace conference after the war state that 77,963 Assyrians were killed in 278 villages of the Diyarbakir province. Jean Naim writes that about 50 villages close to Midyat were ruined and their Assyrian inhabitants slaughtered, but he does not name any of them nor give any casualty figures. However, the figure agrees with the data of the Patriarchate. Van in October 1914, 71 Assyrian men of Ɂgsmås Gawo were arrested and taken to the local government center in Barskale and killed. In November 1914, Russian troops briefly occupied the towns of Barskale and Sarai, following their retreat. The Assyrian and Armenian populations of these areas were accused of collaboration and targeted for revenge. According to eyewitness accounts collected by Russians and local observers, at least 12 villages were wiped out in this period. Cevdet Pasha, the governor of Van, is reported to have held a meeting in February 1915 at which he said, "We have cleansed the Armenians and Syriac Christians from Azerbaijan, and we will do the same in Van." In late 1915, Cevdet Bey, military governor of Van Vilayet, upon entering Siirt with 8,000 soldiers whom he himself called the Butchers' Battalion, ordered the massacre of almost 20,000 Assyrian civilians in at least 30 villages. The same Butcher battalions killed all the male Assyrian and Armenian population of Bitlis. They reportedly raped the women, and subsequently sold them or gave them as gifts. The town of Siirt was populated by Assyrians and Armenians. Siirt was the seat of a Chaldean Archbishop Adisha who was murdered by the Kurds. The eyewitness Hyacinth Simon wrote that 4,000 Christians died in Siirt. According to Joseph Naim, who was an Assyrian priest, the number of Assyrians killed in the town of Siirt alone exceeded 8,000. Eyewitness accounts state that the Assyrian men were rounded up by criminal gangs and forced to a march to the valley of Zayaba, where they were killed. This was followed by the gang's attack on women. The Ottoman officer Rafael de Nogales described a slope crowned by thousands of half-nude and still bleeding corpses, lying in heaps. He then wrote that when he entered Siirt, he saw that the police and the locals were sacking Christian homes, and learned that the governors of the town directed the massacre, which had been arranged beforehand. According to the Blue Book of the American government, widespread ethnic cleansing and massacres occurred against the Assyrians as well as Armenians in the Hakkari area, with the orders for the deportations of Armenians being misinterpreted as orders against all Christians by the local Kurds. It was reported that an attack was launched on Assyrian dwellings in summer 1915, and that Assyrians were attempted to be starved out. According to 핍ጵȳȳ, Toynbee, an Assyrian village called Gola, with the population of 300, was attacked and its men were killed, while the women and children were forced into slavery and the houses were pillaged. In another village with 50 houses, the Kurds reportedly killed the entire civilian population. The Blue Book states that in one district of Hakkari, only 17 Christian survivors were left from 41 villages. In April 1915, after a number of failed Kurdish attempts, Ottoman troops invaded Gawa, a region of Hakkari, and massacred the entire population. There were later reports of the mass killing of hundreds of Assyrians in the same area, and women being forced into sexual slavery. David Gaunt wrote that the Assyrians of the Hakkari area were targeted in a full ethnic cleansing, and asserted that they faced the full wrath of the Ottoman government as well as the local Kurdish tribes. He claimed that, due to their consistent contact and collaboration with the Russians, they were targeted with atrocities, and after a battle in which they collaborated with the Russians to defeat the Ottoman army, the army perpetrated the massacres against Christians in Barskale, Siirt and Bitlis described above. Talat Pasha also allegedly ordered a policy in which Ottoman troops, with the support of Kurdish tribes, defeated Assyrians and drove them to the mountains, subsequently destroying their property. Assyrian resistance in Upper Mesopotamia. On March 3, 1918, the Ottoman army led by Kurdish soldiers assassinated one of the most important Assyrian leaders at the time. This resulted in the retaliation of the Assyrians. 噚psyphorabor of the Bitiri tribe led a successful attack against the Ottomans. Assyrian forces in the region also attacked the Kurdish fortress of Çİмкոշakak, the leader who had assassinated Marshi-Mun 19 Benyamin. They successfully stormed it, defeating the Kurds. However, Simko escaped and fled. Assyrians were involved in a number of clashes in Turkey with Ottoman forces, including Kurds and Circassians loyal to the empire. When armed and in sufficient numbers, they were able to defend themselves successfully. However, they were often cut off in small pockets, vastly outnumbered and surrounded, and unarmed villages made easy targets for Ottoman and Kurdish forces.